The 5th Congressional District for the state of Georgia is no longer represented in Congress. John Lewis, who had occupied that seat since 1987, passed away, and his seat has yet to be filled. John Lewis began his career as an activist as a teenager. By 23, he was addressing the March on Washington alongside his mentor Martin Luther King Jr. Later in his life, Lewis reflected on the fiery speech he wished to give in his youth at the march. Lewis had planned to describe the Civil Rights March through the South like Sherman burning Atlanta during the Civil War. But before he was able to speak, King and another mentor, A. Philip Randolph, cautioned him to speak for peace. After giving the toned-down version of his speech, Lewis said he had felt defeated, as if he had failed by adopting a passive and peaceful approach. Later in life, after witnessing the effects of nonviolent direct action up close, he became dedicated to the philosophy as the only way to make real change.
I wonder if you would tell us if you think nonviolent means work as well for advancing progress on economic issues as they do on advancing progress on political liberty.
I happen to believe that the way of nonviolence is one of those immutable principles that you cannot deviate from. If you want to have good ends, your means must be good and noble. Somehow, in some way, the end must be caught up in the means. Organize, mobilize at all levels. I believe that.
It is one thing to grapple with a demanding philosophy in a dialogue, or to weigh the implications of different approaches about how to live, when you know you will leave the conversation without any obligation to meet even our most ambitious ideals. It is another to consider a way of life and a philosophy about how to confront power, when the one describing it is a living, breathing manifestation of the most hard-won and demanding aspects of a way of acting. Certainly for my entire life, John Lewis has been the absolute incarnation of the nonviolent philosophy that characterized the movements for civil rights in South Africa, India, and the United States during the 20th century. It's a philosophy that is prized and celebrated, even as it is also criticized for being too passive, too demanding, and too obsessed with the need for suffering. The protests that have so moved our cities in the past months have been wrapped up in a question about this heritage of considering ends only ever in terms of means. The powers that be are so corrupt and so wrong, and the suffering of so many of the most marginalized appear to be consequences that seem completely unacceptable. It is remarkable, then, that John Lewis, even as he passed away in the midst of that new movement toward justice, never wavered from his belief in the importance of nonviolent and non-passive protest. He committed himself in this way not because he relished in suffering, but in the belief that the outcomes of our actions are always and forever wrapped up in how those outcomes came to be. As he put it, somehow, in some way, the ends must be caught up in the means. While I know the urge to meet power with power is great, and the suffering of so many is loud and needs to be answered, I find myself recommitted to Lewis's philosophy. We have all kinds of evidence about what happens when powers are supplanted by other powers, or when violent revolution brings in a new order that eventually turns sour and needs to be overthrown itself. But using Lewis's own logic, I can see that the means of nonviolent resistance cannot be entirely ineffective, because whatever else good that movement has given to the people of this nation, it certainly gave us a John Lewis.